Daniel O'Brien here. Today I'm talking with Jono Frew. Thank you for your time today, Jono.
It's all good, man. It's all good.
Alrighto. So, Jono, you're located in New Zealand and you're doing amazing things with regenerative agriculture. So, I wanted to start with tell me a bit of your background and how you got involved in regenerative agriculture.
Right. Okay. So I started my farming career at the ripe age of 11 years old, and I come from a family of chemical applicators and sheep dipping contractors.
Yep.
And so I was brought up literally around chemicals, which doesn't excite me now to know the effects of a lot of those chemicals, but nevertheless, that's how I started life, and it was normal for me. I'd wake up as a child. My stepfather would take me and my twin sister out with him sheep dipping, and we'd wake up in the back country of New Zealand, in the back of a truck. Sort of every day was sort of, I wonder where we are today. You just had no idea, and I'd wake up and immerse myself amongst the dogs barking and the sheep, making all the noise, and I even remember like the beardies that we had. We had a couple of beardies for sheepdogs, and the first thing I'd do would be, and the first thing that they would want to do was come and greet us, after having been in the sheep shower themselves, covered in, all those lovely chemicals.
Yeah.
So that was my life. And one day at school, one of my neighbours who went to Duntroon School, which is where I went to primary school, he used to talk about this farm that he'd go and ride motorbikes on and have all this great fun. And I was like, man, that sounds like so much fun. And actually turned out to be this woman that my mother met through local engagements around the local watering hole. And so I found myself on this farm one day learning how to ride motorbikes, and it was just the most fun. And I found myself in the cow shed, and I learned at the age of 11, and I was a short 11, I was really short, but I found myself milking cows at like the height of just above the cow's hoof type thing. So I'd be in there milking the cows, and I was quite good at it, to the point where they actually asked me if I'd like to do it every second weekend, and they'd pay me $30 a milking. So I thought, right, I'll do that, and so I offered myself to work for them every second weekend while their staff member was off. And so I worked every second weekend, but actually I just went in there every weekend, and so just every second weekend was paid. And it got to a point when I was at school, and at that point through those years between sort of 11 and 15 years old, that was my life. Like that was, if there was ever any herd testing on, my mum was sweet with me pulling out of school, and this couple who became like my family would come and pick me up from school, and I'd go help them on their farm, and every assessment at school was about farming and cows especially. That was just my thing.
Yeah.
And amongst all the other stuff I did as a child, living on the banks of the Waitaki River, fishing, tubing down the river, it was all, normal stuff. And then I left school at 15 because my deputy principal found me disruptive because I wasn't interested in being at school. And so he asked me if I'd like to leave at 15. And he said to me, all I'd have to do was go and get permission from my mother, and also I would have to get a full-time job, and I would have to take on some extracurricular, educational activities. And so at the time, with having only been working every second weekend, or, being paid for every second weekend, I just went to my boss and said, and it was that night, as soon as I got off the school bus, I rang my boss and said, look, can I have a full-time job? And he said to me, we don't need you, and we can't afford another full-timer, but we can give you a room in the house and say you're full-time. And I was like, oh, sweet, and then asked mum, and mum was sweet with that. And I started that night, I rang the local representative for the ag ITO programs that were run in New Zealand at the time. They're now called primary ITO, and I signed myself up. And so the next day I went to school, having done all the things that I was asked to do to leave school legally at 15, and I wasn't aware that and handing all that information over in the morning to my deputy principal, and then him coming to me as the bell rang at the end of the day and said to me, no, you don't have to come back tomorrow. And so I left school without saying goodbye to anyone. And, these are the days before I didn't have a cell phone. And so I literally just, I was out of there and started life in farming, and it was just like the best years of my life.
Yeah.
And then one day I remember about 2 years into my time there, I did that for like nearly 2 years, worked for, and so yeah, I have to add in there that my income didn't change. So I worked full time for nearly 2 years, earning $30 a milking every second weekend. So it was 4 milkings, so it was $120 a fortnight I earned for nearly 2 years.
Okay.
The best years of my life.
Yeah.
Like the best. And I remember one day my boss's son coming home from school, who went to school at the school I went to, and said to me about how the people at school were taking the piss out of me for the amount of money I was earning, and that I'll never amount to anything. I'll just be a shitty dairy farmer. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, it was almost like a statement to myself, sort of, and to the world, but, in my head, like, sort of like, stuff it all. Like, I'm just going to show all those guys I can do it,
Mm.
And in doing that, I became really driven. And so I was managing farms before I was 20. I left that job straight away because I felt so livid that these people, and so disappointed that these people were so, unkind as to point out my hourly rate. They'd worked it out, my hourly rate.
Yeah.
But in my head, my intention and the way I was feeling was like on top of the world. And then to have all this criticism from people like laughing at me for the money I was earning.
Mm.
But in that time, I'd saved up enough cash to buy my first car, outright, no debt. And anyway, I left that job and spent probably 10 years, a good 10 years striving for this excellence that people expected of farmers, like this production-based model of success, this monetary success.
Yeah.
Where, and I got it. Like I became, a really, really good high production farmer, and I got all the qualifications I did, and still there was something in me that just wasn't ever as happy as what I was back when I was earning $120 a fortnight.
Mm.
And then, in that time, I got married. I had 2 children, but the whole time I was just so busy and in my head with this, no matter what I was doing, it wasn't good enough. And I think that's what a lot of farmers are facing, especially in New Zealand, but also around the world, is like this constant pressure to do better and to do more, to the point where, people are doing amazing things, but they can't be present to that, nor can they stop. They literally, for me anyway, and I can only speak from my own experiences, that really I was never present to my children.
Mm.
And I subconsciously burnt out a marriage, just trying to be this best farmer that I thought society expected of farmers, like this tough. We're tough men, and we don't talk about our feelings, and we must work hard. That really silly stereotype of, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but in New Zealand it's like you've got to be tough, and it just, when I realised the grip that had on me for over a decade, and it came from my wife leaving and my children moving away, was like, holy moly. And then so in that time I did the dairy farm thing for most of the time, like 10, 11 years. I also spent time as a chemical agronomist, and I also done work for my father after my stepfather doing the spraying thing after I had a 100-kilometre an hour on collision with a fert salesman at the age of 19 and broke my femur. So also in that time, because I couldn't bear to sit still, even with a broken femur, I didn't want to be viewed as lazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I faked the clearance so I could go work at a job that would allow me to work with a healing broken femur, which was, hey, I could drive a spray truck. So I did that. And anyway, after years and years of, and when I realised that what I've been doing for so long was really not serving me anymore, I started to look for a job. At the time, I was a manager of a chemical, an aerial and ground-based chemical applicating company. I wanted to find something that was less demanding of my time. And so I I'd signed a contract to become a fertilizer dispatch manager, so running 11 fertilizer trucks across New Zealand. And it was going to be, $100,000 with a work vehicle and 40 or 50 hours a week, like I was, going to be set. And then during my notice period of the chemical contracting game, I was approached by an organic farmer of whom I'd met twice before. And this guy's name is Tim Chamberlain, and he said to me, he said, "Jono, have you got 5 minutes to talk?" And I was training someone to take over my role on that job as the chemical applicator. And I had gotten to a point where I could step back. So I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come and have a yarn to you." And he said to me, he said, "Jono, he told me he was, late 50s, and he's got all these other farms he's on, and he's all these other enterprises that he's involved with." And he just asked me a bit about my experience, and I told him what I'd done. And he said to me, he said, I'd like you to manage my farm." And I was like, "What?" Like, it was a 200-hectare mixed cropping sheep and beef farm that had been organic for some 36 years. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, I know nothing about organics. But something sung to me as like, this is big, And if I look back across my career, I observed things like just death across, when we're dealing with monocultures and trying to maintain monocultures, I was the expert at killing. I killed things for a living.
Yeah.
And I used to watch, I talked about my time as a child, fishing in the rivers at home and tubing. Well, I literally watched those rivers dry up. And I watched them become contaminated with bacteria, to the point where you couldn't have dogs near the river, and now people.
Yeah, wow.
And at that time I realized that I was part of that. And I started to learn things. I created a discussion group called Quorum Sense, because I realized that there were so many farmers out there wanting to do more, but if you follow the industry leaders, this is how we've gotten to where we are. So I could see more through my experience at Harts Creek Farm, because I had to learn. I got thrown in the deep end. Here's 200 hectares of organic mixed cropping sheep and beef farm. Here you go. So I had to learn. And I had some amazing people around me, and I learned a lot. And then I discovered, like, holy moly, I'd just gone and hit the bullseye of the wrong target.
Yeah.
Like, done it really well. Really well.
Yeah.
All the pats on the back. You go to the pub and talk about your production. No one talks about the cost. No one talks about the impact on their family. No one talks about it. But you got the production, man. You were the guy.
Yeah.
And so, in going to this organic farm, I faced the whole community that I knew turn their back on me for a start, because everyone's like, "Oh, where's your flax jandals and your marijuana cigarette?" It was just all this judgment,
Yeah.
And so once I overcame that and realized, man, these farmers are only doing what they're told. Like me, I was just doing what I was told through my whole career, and doing what was taught and led. And I just thought there's got to be something else out there for these farmers, because if they don't have access to it, they're just going to end up where they've always been, like I did until that moment. And so I created this group, and I just got I rang 2 people straight away. I rang Simon Osborne, I rang Nigel Greenwood, and told them that I wanted to create a discussion group just to generate some form of, momentum and information sharing. And then I held a meeting at Harts Creek Farm and opened it up to the wider community, and people just came in. And all of a sudden, all these people started appearing that had been doing really cool stuff, but under the radar. Like when I say cool stuff, I'm like really regenerative stuff that they've been hiding because of the judgment.
Yeah, right.
And I don't mean for a year or two. Some of these guys have been hiding for 30 years.
Yeah, wow. So it shows how much the culture was set in their ways, doesn't it?
Yep. And that was it. That to this day will be what is one of our biggest, causes of friction or limitations, is just that concept that regenerative agriculture is hippie-like or weird, or it doesn't stack up, or it can't work, or where's the data? And, if in that context people are just hell-bent on finding what's wrong, they'll find something that doesn't suit them. and therefore they won't take it on.
Yeah.
Whereas within this group of people sharing knowledge, and from which as well I've generated this network of people where we just share freely with no judgment, so it's a safe space, to this point where we've reached like 1,200 members. And also I've started a business doing this. So I ended up, after the marriage separation and my healing process through that, and done a lot of work on myself. I remember I had Nicole Masters on the phone one day, and we're talking about, you know, how I just really wanted to do more. And she was and is to this day part of Quorum Sense, the group. She said to me, she was like, Jono, we need you now. And what was coming up was I'd had the sixth generation George Chamberlain, my boss's son, come home, and he decided very, very quickly that was his time. You know, it was unplanned, but he came home and it was his time to take over. And so I facilitated that succession, and then I was left with, wow, now what? And I remember Nicole Masters, like, to me, because I always spoke of how I wanted to do more for farmers and be of more service and really offer that access, not only of information and structures and action plans to move forth in a regenerative manner, but also to shift the mindset and the really what it is to be a farmer, and taking back that control and that creativity, because that's what was missing in farmers. It was like farmers didn't have any creativity. Yeah. And when you look at the statistics, you know, New Zealand agriculture as an industry has the highest rate of suicide in the country. And so I wanted to offer farmers the option to be empowered to create systems that are resilient for their operations, profitable, and in doing such, it increases their peace of mind and their joy. Yeah. Like it seemed to be that was all just byproducts. And we deal with the environmental impact. We deal with the recreating of the water cycle and the nutrient cycle that we've done so well in severing. And all that stuff was like a byproduct. So I remember being on the phone to Nicole, like I wanted to, but I had this big weight in my chest, like it's way too big. And I'm just one person. And then I had some conversations, and like I said, a really big one was with Nicole Masters, and she said to me, she's like, you're ready now. And I was entertaining ideas like, you know, no, I'm not, and you know. And then one day I just chose, I said, right, okay. And it was literally a week before my final day at Harts Creek Farm. I said, right, I'm going to do it. Made up a name that just landed with me, Natural Performance Limited. And I just made this thing up from nothing, where now I go out and help farmers every day to create systems that increase their profitability, resilience, joy, and peace of mind. And, you know, even just today, I've come back from a farm visit this morning on a farm whereby we had a 12-year-old boy named William, husband and wife, Mark and Bex, and Mark's father, Ross, all together learning about soil health and function. And these guys took me on. They were my first ever paying clients last year. And it just hit me today, like Ross, so he was watching two generations come up underneath him on the same farm. And he was learning all this stuff for the first time himself, but from his son and even from his grandson. And he was realizing all the limitations that he had through his life as a farmer, you know, for some 50 years, all these contextual limitations of sayings that were stuck in his mind, like, you can't be successful on this land if you don't cultivate, and you must fallow the land here. It doesn't work if you don't. And all these little sayings that came up for him that actually just had him be victim to the circumstances that he faced, like they were the only option. Yeah. And that farm, you know, they bought a no-till drill last year, and we, you know, the plough literally ended up in the scrap bin. Yeah. And this guy who was, you know, watching his son and his grandson come up on the farm, said to me one day, he was in my truck when we were using the direct drill for the first time, drilling a wheat crop into some pasture. And he's just like, I have never in my life seen this, you know, drilling into ground that has not been cultivated. Yeah. And just everything that he had ever known. And that to me, you know, I can't describe the fulfillment and contentment I get from, you know, these experiences.
Yeah, it's funny, and I've said this many times over this series of interviews, just the mindset of regenerative agriculture, and I loved what you said about um, it's like they've had a generation that's taken the creativity out of farming, where like farming or business for that matter, if it's business and making money, you are an innovator. You need to be. You can't just, whether it's opening a cafe, you can't do the same thing for the next 20 years. You've got to be an innovator, and it's great to hear like just that story about the creativity, or he might look at it as an innovation to go, it is an innovation because they're doing it differently on that farm. So it's fantastic to see that, but it's also sad to hear the mindset. And it sounds like in the environment you're in, just so much judgment, and maybe it's more upfront there, and other areas it's there, but it's maybe pushed under the carpet where you're not hearing it as much. But obviously it's very real, and you've experienced that.
And look, it's only as real as what you make it. So,
Yeah.
like, really, show me judgment. You can't.
Mm.
And so I teach people just to not worry about what's going on over the fence, not worry about what people are saying at the pub. It really is none of our business what people think, and just getting present to the impact that taking on that judgment can have, and just that it is a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sort of people that come to you now, Jono, are they people that have been doing regenerative farming behind the scenes for some time, or are they brand new? Who are the sort of people that come to you typically?
So most are brand new.
Okay.
Most are brand new. However, and it comes back to, I quite often have to say this is like, again, the people that, regenerative agriculture as the beast it is, it's like there is no one way of doing it.
Mm.
And so you might find that there's people that are doing regenerative practices without even having heard of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
And so, like for instance, there's always been these trends, right? Like no-till and like minimum till and organic. They're all just individual little linear reductionist monofunction trends.
Yes.
Whereas regenerative agriculture encaptures the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so it's a great question, and I'll answer it like this. The variability of people that I get coming to me is about as variable as the microbes beneath our feet.
Yeah.
Or the microbes, the diversity we have in human beings, the variability. It's so broad.
Mm. Yeah, wow.
Basically, if you've got soil, we can help. And with that, you think of the people that have soil.
Yes.
All sorts of people.
Mm.
We can't live without it. So it's a great question, and there is no real set answer to that. Lots of people.
Yeah.
And some people, like seriously, don't even have any farming background, nor do they have any. Like, what I find is the discussions I really enjoy are those with consumers.
Yeah.
Because they can see the ripple effects of this. Like when you look at the treatments we face in society, the biggest cost in most nations is medical costs.
Mm.
And when you look at the indirect links of a lot of the conditions we're treating, we know that the diseases that we're treating currently are a cause of the system that we operate. We're now aware of the impacts that our gut biome has on our health, and what affects our gut biome is what we eat, literally. And it's the same with our soil. Our soil biome is directly correlated to, the food that we feed it. So that the diversity of within that soil, and getting rid of the things that are detrimental to that biome. So in the soil, we've got a lot of synthetic fertilizer use, we've got a lot of chemical use, animal drenches, all those things impact the biome. It's the same in us as humans. We look at antibiotic treatments, we look at all the supplements we're taking, all of which can be treated with just simply growing diverse whole food.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking veganism or vegetarianism. It's just whole, complete food.
Yeah.
And it starts with the soil. And so that the consumers, they're just fizzing. It's like, wait, you're telling me that we grow food in this way, we eat lots of different foods, it tastes really good, and it's going to make us healthy, and it deals with all the environmental concerns we're discussing right now. It's like, where do I sign up?
Yeah, that's right.
And now farmers have got this opportunity to tap into this market that wasn't there before because it's consumer driven.
Yeah. Consumer driven is important, and one of the people that I've had some interaction with over the years is Georgia from stirringchange.com. So she's actually a nutritionist, and what I love about her story, like she's been like a private chef in New York, and she's looked at veganism, and she's looked at vegetarianism, and she's looked at nutrition like globally in people groups and that, and now she runs like a what to eat program. But what she started doing all this, and she never ever had the intention to look at farming, but she's like, when she went into it, she's like, there I find myself on farms understanding regenerative agriculture. And I love that she came from it from that way, and now she's understanding all these things, even though she's not a farmer, but now she does have acres and grows her own food. But she made that link coming from the other way, where some, as you say, they're a farmer, they go, well, hang on, maybe we need to change our ways. So she's just got a brilliant story as a consumer, like really looking into it as a nutritionist. What do I need to feed myself? And then it's just like, I can't help but go back to farming. So it is quite interesting. And I think farmers need that message. Go, hang on, what do the consumers want? It's like the 101 of business. What do the people want to buy? What do customers want? And then companies and businesses go deliver that to them. And I've had farmers ask me, like they've got a market garden, they're putting in a few acres, and they're like, what do you reckon I should grow? And I'm like, I don't know. I reckon you should go talk to all the local chefs and say, what do you want to buy?
Yeah. And look, for her coming in, that's so perfect, because what she would have done is she would have come in minus all the historic, preconceived notions of what it is to be a farmer.
Yes.
And because really, growing food is not complicated, right? Like it's complex beyond our comprehension, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be complicated. Like there's a distinction between those two.
Yeah.
And for her to come in and draw that link from as a nutritionalist to discovering, well, actually, hey, this all comes down to the soil and how we grow our food, she was then able to look at growing food as the simplistic act that it really is.
Yes.
And just get into it. And so those are the people, like generally, they're the people that take this on the fastest, because they've not got all that baggage of the historic, mindset of conventional agriculture.
Yeah. The mindset is huge. I suppose in any endeavor of being a human, there's probably an element to all of us that resist change. But this is what I know, and I've read this, or I'm an expert in your case. I've won all the awards.
Hey, I am not an expert. I have to say that right now.
Yeah, I mean, with what you're saying, like you were getting the pats on the backs and the awards, and like you can be looked at like, oh, you know what you're doing. But it's when we get to a stage of unplug that and go, hang on, I'm still just as much a student, and just to be open-minded to, how is someone doing it? And as you've created a forum, a discussion group, and I've said this as well on previous interviews, one thing I'm so enjoying about the internet of when I started, I suppose, with Chicken Caravan, the regenerative agriculture 10 years ago, we had the internet, we had Facebook, but it wasn't developed as a communication means of where it is now. Like you look, it was actually 10 years ago, what we were doing, there was little links, but to where it is now to share information, it's crazy. Like I remember back in the day, I looked globally, is anyone using alpacas to protect chickens? And I couldn't find anyone. So I was the dumb idiot. It's like, I'm going to give this thing a go. And I've never publicly said how much I paid for that first alpaca, but I got ripped off like you wouldn't believe. And I did it. And one other farmer in Victoria said, well, if you're doing, we'll give it a go. And then Facebook started growing and all these other farms doing it. And we looked at each other and goes, we don't even know if it works yet. And now we do. We've got data, and that's the fantastic thing about the internet and these forums is we can share these ideas so much faster. And like this, we can have an interview to say, "Hey, what are you doing? What are we doing? What's working?" And
Yeah.
how have you found the internet and technology in the regenerative agriculture in your space?
Well, it's sort of like this, you know. Again, like this, what you said is that this is, isn't it profound? You know, we've never met, and yet we can have this really in depth, you know, connection over a screen. You know, it's quite cool. And for me, as one person, you know, being able to impact hundreds of thousands of people with forums like this, or you know, or catalysts like what the internet is, man, it's you know, the only way you can avoid not learning is just by burying your head in the sand.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And it's like with regenerative agriculture and what we're discovering from the people out there doing it is that it's one thing to have data, but it's also another thing to really hang out in the innovation space of, like, you know, that's why I said before, I wanted to make clear that I don't ever say that I'm an expert. You know, every day I'm learning. And what I like to do is create the space, if you will, or the box from which people can actually openly express because you talked about people fear change. People fear change if they're stuck on being right about something, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to, you know, regenerative agriculture and you know, its complexity, because it is massively complex. Like, we are, you know, at a scientific level, we have no idea. Like, we really have no idea. And in getting to be okay with not knowing it all, it then leaves the space of vulnerability to listen without the filter of, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Or that doesn't line up. Or that's not what I was taught. You put all that aside, embrace the complexity of the ecosystems that we live in, because it's massive. And this relates to, you know, human health, ecosystem function. It's all so complex that, you know, being open to discover newly is, once you get over that fear of not knowing, man, it's like, you know, it's not often I get short for words, but in these moments of wonder, I get short of words, because, man, we are just scratching the surface.
So with it, to bring it all back in, because it is, I suppose, such a big thing in so many ways. Like, it can be simple, but there can be so many elements to it. If someone's watching or listening right now, and they might be on some land and they're like, I've got to do something different. I've got to start doing something different. What would be their first step? What would be your advice? They want to go do something different. Where should they go? What should they do?
Make sure you've got yourself a spade. So, you know, really simple. Get interested in that stuff under your feet, because it is gorgeous. You know, I spent 12 years farming and never dug one hole.
Yeah, right.
People just, you know, it's just, they walk on this thing called the ground. You know, if they were only aware of what's going on down there, you know, so getting some basic soil health understanding, and so, like, you know, the roles of various, you know, plants and the nutrient cycles and the water cycle, and most importantly that carbon cycle. There's a lot of information online around, and I'm going to start rolling out some free to access web-based material, and I've already got stuff. If you check out my YouTube, it's all there. Is just talking to people in a way that's relatable and simple. So, you know how I said things are just so complex down there? Where people get caught up is they confuse complex with complicated. Yep. So it's complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. So I take the complexity and what I understand of ecosystem functions and put it in a way that's just like, people could actually understand,
Yeah.
and then take that stuff home, and then get into their soil and start to understand, and start to see for themselves the limiting factors that they've not been aware of.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it might be something to do with your water infiltration. It might be something to do with your system whereby you're not having, you know, plants fully completing the carbon cycle. It might be that you've not got any diversity, and you might want to look at understanding the power of diversity. There's so many ways you can start, and it all starts by learning and understanding. And from that, you can create anything, whatever suits you and your operation. There's no, and what I want to make clear is there's no standardization in regenerative agriculture. There is no one thing fits all. You know, you look at conventional ag, it's like, here's the manual. We've got manuals to tell you how to farm.
Yeah.
And in regenerative agriculture, it's just about learning the principles, understanding basic functions, and how they might work for you and your not only your operation, but like your lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I remember the interview a couple of months back with Darren Doherty, and we're talking about climate. And he goes, make sure you understand the climate of your farm. Like, we all talk about the climate of the world and these things, which I know in some ways are sort of too big to change. Like, it's like, hang on, let's just look at your climate. Because as you said, the manual for a farm, which could be 1 metre away, 1 kilometre, 100 kilometres away, no two farms are the same. To know that what is your climate, whether that be rainfall, temperature, wind, like everything, understanding that. And I think it's a good example. You said we've got this manual for farming, but unless it was written on your farm over the last 30 years and here's all the observations in that paddock and this one, you've got to look through. You can probably glance through that and go, maybe I could take some tips. But you're right. It's not just it's like reading a manual from some other continent and go, this will work for you. It goes, well, it might not.
And I love what you say there about, you know, they see the climate as this big thing that they can't have an impact on. And in that space of seeing it as this great big massive thing, that one they think is too big, and two they don't fully understand. It's like looking at you're at the bottom of a mountain, you can see the top, but what you don't see is the mountain.
Yes.
Or said differently, it's like looking at a pile of dishes, right? And all you see is the pile of dishes. But really what there is to do, and especially in the starting phase of learning about regenerative agriculture, is really there is only just one dish to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And you do another dish, and then you do another dish. There is only that first act.
Mm.
We're not gonna conquer the mountain with our first step. There's just the first step.
Yeah. Yep. It's like live in the now, in the present of what.
Oh, dude,
what we can do.
If you want to change the world, that's fantastic. But if you're anything like me, it's you know, it brings on anxiety. At times, unbearably so, to think of like the big picture and what there is to do, and then I represent myself to know actually all there is to do is now. I'm going to pick up the phone and ring one person about what's happening on farm. I'm gonna, you know, just all there is to do is that next step.
Mm. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Jono. It's been fantastic to hear of all the great work you're doing there in New Zealand and beyond, as we're talking about technology, as people can benefit from this beyond. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to when we have another call together.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your time. It was lovely to have a chat with you.